May Jesus and Mary be loved by all hearts. If you're old enough to have been taught by Catholic sisters in the days when it was common for parishes to be staffed by a congregation of religious in full habit, you've probably heard jokes about kids getting their knuckles rapped for misdemeanors. Such jokes sadden and embarrass Catholics, and we pray that these ill-tempered nuns were few and far between. But whatever the statistics, it did happen, and it wasn't that rare. At least half a dozen people have confided to me their unhappy memories of nuns who taught them in Catholic schools. Children can't assess situations from an adult's point of view, and too often we cling to our childhood hurts even after we grow up. Without excusing these women, will you allow me to present their situation from a mature perspective? I'll be talking about American teaching sisters in the 20th century. Many religious congregations in Europe wanted to send sisters to serve the Catholic immigrants who moved to America in the late 1800s and 1900s. We know our American history. Millions came from Europe to break ground and plant crops, to build railroads, turn forests into lumber, and build cities with skyscrapers. Irish and German Catholics did their utmost to bring a priest with them to the new land, but sisters lived in community and couldn't travel alone with families. European congregations would ask for volunteers from among their members, then raise money, then seek an American bishop who would extend an invitation. Many dioceses were in primitive condition and busy raising funds to build churches to serve their flocks. Religious could not expect much financial support from the new immigrants, so a lot of help came from Catholics in the old country. 2 or 3 nuns would arrive on a boat, travel by horse and wagon to a designated town, buy a house, ideally not far from a church, and then the parishioners would erect a one-room building to serve as a classroom. This was a big adjustment for sisters who were trained in Europe. Think of the convents in Europe, centuries old, gardens, fences, chapels, chapter rooms, cells, kitchen, refectory, laundry, workrooms, and rooms to instruct young ladies. In Europe, upper and middle class young ladies whose families didn't need to send their daughters to work as maids or in factories were welcomed within the convent walls in special areas, not exclusively cloistered, and the nuns would instruct the girls in reading, penmanship, basic math, catechism, and how to navigate the Latin Missal at Mass, and some fine arts like embroidery, painting, and calligraphy. The goal was to turn the girls into good Catholic wives who could manage grocery money, hand on to their children the truths of the faith, instruct their children in virtue, and assist their husbands with a bit of income by turning out some artistic work. At no time were boys admitted within the convent walls. Boys were taught in classrooms by Christian brothers or tutored by hired laymen, and the more promising devout boys who possibly had a vocation were tutored in rectories by the priests. The new American community of 2 to 4 sisters were operating on a skeleton crew. Contacting their mother superior for any question required writing a letter that would require weeks, even months over land and sea. Soon, young ladies applied to join, and the sisters had to set aside time to train the novices. We'll overlook all the homesickness and sacrifices that these European nuns made to come to a wild, untamed country. Very quickly, the American Catholics wanted their boys to be included in the classrooms, and they wanted their daughters to get a more general education of history and geography and skip the fine arts. The nuns could adjust the curriculum and learn to teach classroom style, but most of the congregations expressly forbade their sisters from teaching boys. Gradually, a compromise was achieved that the nuns would teach boys up to age 11. Meanwhile, the demand for teaching sisters kept growing, So these little pioneer communities started sending out their novices to start new convents with maybe one nun as a superior. The sisters who were trained in Europe were highly educated. Most of them now were struggling to learn English, but the novices admired them, and they were doing their best to follow the example and become good sisters. But the demand for more teaching sisters kept increasing, and pretty soon very young American sisters were sent out to start convents, with a handful of novices under her care. The American sisters were not highly educated, and they didn't have years of experience in religious life before being made superior. That cycle kept repeating, with younger and inexperienced superiors responsible for larger and larger schools, overseeing buildings with multiple classrooms, and more novices to train. After World War I, there was increasing pressure on the nuns to educate boys all the way through high school. When bishops demanded this, some convents closed up, and the nuns moved to some other diocese where that wasn't required. Other congregations wrote to Europe to ask permission for a new clause in their constitutions. Some congregations would not grant permission because handling boys is a different ball of wax, and the sisters were not trained for that. And many didn't believe that young men should be taught by women. I don't know the statistics, but it wasn't rare for American congregations to petition Rome for permission to start a new branch or a new congregation so that they could give boys a Catholic-based education in America. It was all very messy and complicated, and not everybody agreed inside every American convent. Now it's World War II, and the soldiers are coming home to start families in a free country. It's the baby boom. Catholics fought in the war, and there's a new respect between Catholics and Protestants. These young men have seen the world, and the war brought new innovations and inventions. The demand for higher education has reached exponential levels. Now every Catholic diocese wants several high schools and even a Catholic college. The sisters are expected to provide all this cheap education. The sisters don't need a salary. Each convent shares one car. Meals are frugal. Habits are mended until they can't be patched anymore. Catholics put their money into buildings. Now the sisters need degrees. Instead of resting in the summers and rejuvenating their spiritual life, the sisters are sent to universities to take a few classes and gradually, after many summers, earn a bachelor's degree, a master's, and even a doctorate. What was their daily workload? The nuns rose early and typically prayed in community a half hour before Mass. After Mass, a quick breakfast and off to the classrooms. After school, the sisters tutored slow students or gave special instruction, for example, musical instruments or the arts or some foreign language. Of course, that was mostly the European sisters who could do that. Others were writing plays and then overseeing drama practice several nights a week. After a quick supper at the convent, they were off to be the school janitors, cleaning the classrooms, the halls, and the bathrooms. Others were over at the church, acting as parish sacristans, washing altar linens, changing candles, and cleaning the church. When the sisters got back to their convent cells, they had to prepare for the next day's classes, and then they fell into bed. On Saturdays, they washed and ironed and starched their wimples, gave classes to the novices, and in season canned vegetables or worked in the garden and cleaned house. Many had a chicken coop in those days or a dairy cow. There was a lot going on in American convents. On Sundays, I hope they rested, but I suspect they hit the books. But you say they were sustained by a deep spiritual life. That's what I assumed, because my experience in religious life was in a cloistered monastery. We had 6 years of novitiate instruction, 2 10-day retreats annually, 1 in community and 1 private, a personal monthly day of recollection, an hour of spiritual reading daily baked into our schedule, 2 hours of mental prayer, and 7 times a day a bell would call us to chapel to chant the divine office and steep our souls in the Word of God. I had no idea that most active congregations before Vatican II had no obligation to pray the divine office, the backbone of my union with God. Many congregations began as an act of service to the sick, the poor, the orphans, the elderly. And since all the liturgy was in Latin and very, very long, because the divine office was much longer before Vatican II, their constitution stipulated only a very shortened office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and sometimes that in the vernacular. Time for private prayer was very brief, and instead of spiritual reading, there was study time for the teaching sisters. The main principle of the spiritual life of active congregations was not to be a bride of Christ, but to be a living oblation, a sacrificial lamb. It was all about obedience and work, nothing really about love. How long could you sustain being a Holocaust without feeling exhausted? How long could you remain cheerful in the classroom, especially if you were fasting? The sisters felt they had a duty to impart a spirit of sacrifice and obedience on their students. That's all they had to offer. Pope John Paul, Saint John Paul, turned it all upside down. First of all, with his theology of the body, which gives us not just a fabulous image of the married life, but the ultimate image of the church's union with the bridegroom. Religious were blown away by those 5 years of Wednesday audiences in which he delved into Genesis and the scriptures. How we looked forward to those every week. Next, John Paul called all the superiors of religious congregations in the whole world to prepare for a major synod to explore and articulate the principles of religious life. In 2,000 years, the Church had never issued a major document on religious life. Now, papers from congregations around the world were being written and published several years in advance of the Great Synod. It was exciting in the cloister to read all the beautiful aspects that were published month after month on different themes. Finally, the Great Synod took place, and John Paul summarized it in 1996 in the lengthy apostolic exhortation, Vita Consecrata. It starts out with a magnificent reflection on the Transfiguration, which every Catholic should read. That document elevated religious life to a new plateau. It dogmatically declared that the vowed life is a life of perfection, higher than the priesthood, because it is in principle the life the whole Church aspires to achieve, union with Christ. It doesn't mean that married people or priests can't achieve a greater holiness. It doesn't mean that religious are de facto perfect. No, we have to strive to be saints day by day like everybody else. But we get to live in a bridal relationship with Christ more directly than those with other obligations in their vocations. We are not slaves, but brides. All our work and services are secondary and only fruitful when done in union with Christ. Moreover, it is now church law that unless there is a special exception in the constitutions, religious are required to wear the habit of their congregation, to be a living reminder, a signpost, a billboard to all who see them that this earthly life is fleeting, however good. So we can be happy in poverty and chastity with one set of clothes and the minimum of life's pleasures. In heaven, we'll be swept into the great wedding feast. This life is short, so avoid sin and prepare for union with God. New religious congregations reflect all these wonderful principles, and most of them don't have room for all the vocations that are applying. But old congregations are struggling. The Second Vatican Council was all about the laity, explaining the importance of the baptismal vocation as the evangelizers in the workplace. The documents only talked about the ordained and the lay. Religious were hardly mentioned in the Vatican II documents, and many religious, including myself, got the idea that it wasn't as important as the lay vocation, and that maybe religious should be acting like lay people to be more effective evangelizers. So congregations that had an active agenda set aside their habits. They moved into apartments. They left their many institutions, schools, hospitals, all sorts of places to take on jobs like lay people do. Some were seriously driving taxis so they could interact and bear witness to the gospel to the man on the street. Suddenly appearing in lay clothes, these good-looking sisters were approached by men who didn't realize they were nuns. Naturally, many ended up dating and getting married. Others embraced all sorts of civil rights movements and fell into wrong movements. Approximately 70% of American active congregations today support the LGBTQ+ movement, the contraceptive movement, the abortion movement, and some other political agendas that are not in keeping with the Catholic teaching. They don't wear a habit, and they are rather invisible, and American Catholics are shocked to hear this. You might be hearing this for the first time. If you are sending money to older teaching institutions, imagining that you're helping them to live their Catholic vocations, please do your homework. You might be contributing to something very anti-Catholic. Pray for these religious, that they will come to understand that they are brides of Christ, and be merciful to your memories of sisters who were not the best examples of charity and patience. They were having a struggle. God bless you. May Jesus and Mary be loved by all hearts.